Chapter 2 Exiluk. Exiluk and Captain Grievous stood on the forecastle deck of the Green Eye. The figurehead of gold serpents with green eyes led the way. "That's the land where giants and witches rule," Captain Grievous said. He looked towards a faint outline of black cliffs and a sky wisped with clouds. White whipped patches of brown dotted the choppy surface of the vast navy blue and grey ocean surrounding them. The captain was tall for a goblin. The top of his head almost reached the height of Exiluk's cheeks. He was lanky and lean, though his muscles appeared dense through his yellowish-brown, tough, leathery skin. "What do you know of it?" Exiluk said, gently running his finger along one of his thick, ribbed horns. His hairy, blue-skinned and stocky body felt vigorous as he looked towards the cliffs. "They say there's riches and resources beyond a goblin's dream in that land, but the giants would tear us apart before they'd share it, and the witches would turn us to toads. I'd rather trade goblin steel with the Disians, and so I do," Grievous said. "They've got lavish palaces and grand cities built by human and dwarven slaves. They don't like strangers. It's said to be a cruel old land, and I'm glad they keep themselves to themselves." Exiluk stared at the cliffs, imagining a giant standing in a palace of gold that reached into the clouds. He ran his finger from the top of his head around his ear to a sharp point behind him, the ribbed ridges creating a sensual rhythm between finger and horn. The sharpness of the point satisfied his fingertip as he pressed it. As he revelled in the satisfaction, he also cringed at the thought of his other horn, mangled at the end. He curtailed the thought so he didn't have to relive it in his mind. "I have heard that to the west of that land is a barrier cast by witches. My village, Shihantikup, is in the swamps that line the northwest of the forest beyond that land. It is a forest so vast and mysterious that rarely will a creature cross it." The goblin captain nodded. 10 years, you said you've travelled. What does it feel like to be almost home after so long?" A yearning for more panged inside of Exiluk. The thought of home agitated him. He was no longer Keradin, no longer a lifelong student of the mind. His abilities to see into other minds had diminished to the basic instincts he had as a child. His daily practices had almost reduced to nothing. His hunger for the material world had grown beyond recognition, and he felt good. The hunger was infused with intense excitement. "I feel," he paused, "conflicted." The goblin captain peered through his looking-glass at the land where giants and witches rule. "If I heard of goblin slaves in some cruel land, I wouldn't sleep so well. I don't know how the free ones can." He shook his head. "If we don't look after our own kind, what will we look after?" "You don't see many dwarves around. Not enough to take down a land as powerful as you say that one is. Humans, though, I wonder why they do nothing. Yet in other lands, humans also take humans as slaves. What a strange creature!" As Exiluk spoke, he felt a deep urge to visit the land of witches and giants. He had to see it for himself, the power of giants, the magic of cruel witches. What a place it must be, he thought. Keradins practice the philosophy that everything is connected on different planes, and when we harm one thing, it harms us too, in one way or another. "It's a nice philosophy, but I wouldn't want to live my life in perpetual fear of my actions," the goblin captain said. "Yet there is enormous power to be had in accepting the fact. There is an indescribable satisfaction in living the way of the Keradin, a serenity, a peace, a depth of mind and awareness that only rigorous practice can unlock. Yet the way of the world outside of our swamps is more—" He paused. "It is difficult to describe." He looked around the ship. It is more exciting, more addictive, more intense. I feel opportunity." A rogue swell rolled underneath them, lifting and jerking the ship. The goblin crew whispered to each other and gave Exiluk worried looks, their unease growing palpable. They had been sailing together for many days, and yet they couldn't let go of their superstitions. Taking a horned being that they had never seen before on their ship would bring them bad fortune. "I understand you. It's that sense that made me the most respected steel trader in the world. In your swamps, the Cerridin may have their peace and serenity, and it may be nice, but they'll never know the feeling of being world-renowned." Old wisdom battled with Exiluk's new mind. He knew that something in what they were saying was wrong, but he couldn't quite grasp it or put it into words. 10 years of travel had changed him many times over. The feeling of being world-renowned tingled inside of him. "When we left Dunhera, I was ready to go home. I thought my adventure was over, yet now I know I must visit the land where giants and witches rule." Captain Grievous laughed. "Ha ha ha! Those treasures have called me too, yet we've always got temptations, don't we, Cerridin?" "My kind spends all our lives learning to master the mind. We learn how to tell the difference between temptation and intuition, and we learn to catch on to that path that drives us towards our fate. I think I can tell the difference, Goblin." "This will be a fitting end to my adventure," Exiluk hissed. Something inside of him knew he was lying. He wasn't sure if he could tell the difference anymore. So subtle were the strands of the fabric of the universe. "We can't dock in their ports without the right permissions, and that coastline's too treacherous. See that over there?" Captain Grievous pointed to a patch of grey haze on the horizon that Exiluk could barely see. "That means a storm's coming. You can already feel the winds about to pick up. We'll not get close enough to shore for you to row in before the storm hits, and I can't wait it out. I've got 3 days to get to Port Wood and deliver this steel, or my contract's void. No, Cerridin, I'm afraid this is not your destiny. We must continue, full sail." The ship rose and fell upon another rogue swell. "Must I swim?" The goblin laughed. "Ha ha! If you wish to die." "Destiny does not fear death," Exiluk said. He felt compelled by the thought of one last adventure before settling in the swamps again. He remembered he had once seen the swamps as brilliant and full of life and energy. Now he pictured mediocrity and glum brown sludge. "I have treasures from my travels worth more than this ship and its cargo." The goblin looked at the incoming storm, looked at the land, and at Exiluk. "No treasure's worth my reputation, Cerridin." He looked towards the storm again and pondered. "You know, us goblins love a good gamble. You've got to take risks in life. How about this, then?" He grinned. "The ultimate bet. A bet of destiny." He grinned and laughed, revealing sharp teeth and yellowish saliva. "We'll sail closer to the shore and I'll give you a boat. If we beat the storm, you might just crash that boat into the reefs and survive. If you're lucky. That swell looks like it'd take the best of seacraft to manage. If the storm beats us, well, I wouldn't fancy anyone's chances." Another swell rolled under the ship, rocking it violently from side to side. The wood creaked and yawned, settling as the swell moved on. The wind picked up and a gust howled through the ship's sails. Dense, low and sodden clouds surged towards them, swallowing the blue sky in their path. "The wager?" Exiluk said. "I'm not interested in what you've got now. I'm interested in our destiny. When we meet again, I'll be entitled to one thing you've acquired, no matter what it is, and no matter its value to you." "What if I have nothing?" What if you've got the whole world? Ha ha ha, the goblin laughed. Fine, we will roll the dice of fate. The goblin's big black pupils grew bigger, and he bellowed laughter. Rain began to fall gently, and Exiluk noticed the sky above had thickened and was becoming darker, fast. In the distance, lightning flashed. Change your course 10 degrees starboard, the goblin shouted. We're dropping our guest off early. The goblins darted around the ship with impressive agility and strength, eager to finally get rid of the horned being. A storm's a sea goblin's greatest enemy, and we're about to toy with one in a dance of destiny. All for a Cerridin stranger. What a tale this'll be. I hope you can row, Cerridin, 'cause the waves'll swallow you whole and chew you up on them reefs. The wind caught the sails and the ship picked up speed towards the land. The ship lifted and rocked upon the swells, the wood groaning as it flexed. The rain gathered in Exiluk's hair and beard and soaked his robe, and he couldn't take his eyes off the land ahead. Close to the shore, waves rolled, lifted and crashed against the rock. Exiluk couldn't tell how big the waves truly were. They seemed monstrous, yet they coaxed him, lured him. This way, they said to him, to destiny. There was only a small alcove of sand between sharp, jagged rocks and a cliff face that loomed perilously. Your rowers ready? Grievous called from the deck. You'd best go now before the storm gets any worse. We need to get out of here. A small rowing boat hung from a frame. It swung from side to side, pushed by the wind and the rocking of the ship. A vivid flash of light ripped the sky. A pause. Explosive thunder. The clouds burst. The boat lowered to the side of the ship, and Exiluk climbed in as it rocked. His bag was packed and in the boat already. Good luck, Cerridin, the goblin captain winked, and the boat lowered quickly towards the sea. I'll be seeing you for my half of the bargain, he shouted, laughing so loud it overpowered the sounds of the storm. Faster! The goblin shouted. The boat dropped as if it was in free fall. It hit the side of the ship and jerked and lowered again. There was no fear in Exiluk, only determination. Get to the land where giants and witches rule, he thought. Water met wood, and Exiluk's boat rocked in the turbulence as he detached the ropes that lowered him in. He grabbed the oars and began rowing towards the land. The goblin captain shouted something, but the storm drowned his words. The swells jerked the boat about mercilessly. The closer to land he got, the more violent they became, until waves surrounded him and crashed into him and tossed him, and he felt exhilaration as they slung him towards the shore. The ocean was the true master of his destiny. The storm scorned Exiluk's efforts at rowing, but the currents were in his favour. Give me all you've got! Ha 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 ha! He roared and laughed hysterically. Thunder exploded and rain bombarded down. Icy water flooded the boat and he soared upwards as a swell lifted him higher than a watchtower. He laughed like a madman dancing with death as the wave dropped him into freefall. The boat flipped. He soared into the water. The cold bit him hard as the ocean swallowed him, gripping him, turning him, dragging him. Rock. Thud. More dragging. He held his breath, calm and determined, not fearful. He surfaced and gasped for air. Another wave landed on top of him and slammed him into rock. He woke on a bed of wet, slimy rock, the storm relentlessly battering him with rain. He was cold and had no idea how long he had been there. No sight of his pack or the boat. He was drenched, and his muscles were stiff. The wind gusted, dragging stinging sand with it. He wiped his face and bolted towards shelter in the cliffs. Wind howled like an angry ghoul as it rapped into the entrance of a cave. Patches of crystals glimmered on the cave walls. He sat on a rock and took a deep breath. His pack was lost, all the trinkets from his travels gone. Panic. Rushed his hand into his pocket and felt for the 3 items he kept with him, always. The black gold coin, still there, relief. The airy jewel, still there, more relief. The golden dragon's tooth, also there, and he breathed a deep sigh of relief, and relaxed. He removed his robe and spun it tight, wringing as much water from it as he could. He was cold, but not as cold as he could be. He was fortunate that his body retained heat much better than many other beings he had encountered. He wrapped his robe back around himself, huddled in between some rocks, and lay on his back, damp, but warming up, tired, and becoming more comfortable, drifting off, happily, satisfied. The semi-sleep state made him aware of passing thoughts and dreams, and a slight niggling guilt. As he had travelled, his ego had grown. He had learnt what it was to feel important, selfish and powerful. That was not the Cerridin way. He didn't mind too much. That guilt was a remnant of his old self, and it was becoming easier and easier to push away. The thought of an exciting future overpowered the guilt of becoming egotistical, and he could recognize his ego, which meant he was not that bad. Only creatures with big egos and those who were blind to their egos were dangerous. He smiled at that thought, that he wasn't that bad or that lost, and he drifted into a mesh of dreams. Metal plunging into flesh, life leaving body. Exiluk snapped awake, heaving and sweating, his mind full of the nightmare. He tried to block it out, but it was too hard to remove the image from his mind. The gasping, the helplessness. Once the blade had bound with her body, her soul had been helpless, and that helplessness haunted him. He focused on the sounds of the water. He pictured the waves crashing outside, the moonlight, anything but the blood. Just the waves, the coaxing, relaxing waves. He drifted back into the dream state. This time, his dreams were calmer, more pleasant. Exiluk woke to the sound of water licking the rocks in the cave. The high tide must have engulfed the beach. Alert, he rolled his robe up around his waist and walked outside. It was light and the storm had passed. The sky was white and grey with clouds, and the sea a dark grey. Whitish-brown patches formed where the waves broke on the shore and upheaved the sand and rock with their force. The air was crisp and fresh. He smiled. A large wave broke in the distance, surged up the beach until it lost all speed and power, and gently wrapped around his ankles and into the cave. It pulled back, gathering speed as it flowed into the ocean again. Another wave surged up the beach, this time just as it pulled back. He left the cave and followed the edge of the cliff, found a path that had been shaped by water erosion, and made his way to the top. From the vantage point of the cliffs, he searched the beach for his boat. He didn't expect to find it, as it had likely been swept away with the storm, and his belongings with it. That didn't matter. He had his 3 precious trinkets, and his damp robe. Steam came from his mouth as he breathed, and from his robe because of his body heat. He headed for what looked like a settlement of tents or huts in the distance. He could just about make out the flickering of a fire and 2 figures. Giants, he hoped. It was hard to tell with the distance. The cliff tops were covered in soft greenish-grey grass, stiff with frost, leaving clear footprints as Exiluk headed towards the settlement. The land was mostly flat, forming large open plains that led far in the distance to wild, black and deeply fissured snow-capped mountains that climbed majestically into the clouds. The air was crisp and still, and Exiluk's footprints rhythmic. As he walked, he paid attention to the still landscape and the changing clouds, and the quiet beauty of his surroundings made for a pleasant journey. He reached the settlement. A giant caught sight of Exiluk and froze. His expression, slightly gormless, was one of confusion and intrigue. He wore grey furs and was 2 or 3 times the size of Exiluk and bulging with muscle. He tapped the giant sitting next to him and pointed at Exiluk, saying,
"Oi, what the bloody hell's that? It looks like a goat man."
The other giant was wrapped in a brown robe. His hair was thick and messy, and it reached all the way to his waist. He said,
"What the bloody hell are you? I've never seen a goat man before," he said to his friend in a different tone.
"Look at his eyes. They're glowing like a magicker's."
"And one of his horns is mangled," his friend replied. Are you a magicker?"
"I am a Ceridin, not a witch, nor a goat man. I come from the other side of the forest of Dar-Perith, from the swamplands. I have been travelling around the world, and I am on my way home. Please, could I have some water and perhaps sit by your fire? My boat capsized. I am cold."
"Well, you look like a goat man and a magicker. How do I know you're not trying to trick me? What happened to your mangled horn?"
"Has a goat ever done you any harm? Or a witch, for that matter?" Exiluk ignored the question about his horn. He hated thinking about it. The muscular giant said,
"No, I like goats, that's true. Not such a fan of witches, though, and you've definitely got a magicker's eyes."
"Well, I am much more of a goat than a witch. I can't even cast magic," he said. "My name is Exiluk. It is nice to meet you."
"You talk a lot for a goat," the long-haired giant said. "And you talk clever, like the witches and the giants past the mountain are said to."
"I'm not quite a goat, you see." Exiluk smiled. He could sense the pleasant and simple nature of these giants, and he felt comfortable, despite their size and strength.
"Oi, wife! Come and look at our new friend, the goat man," the muscular giant called loudly.
From inside the round building, a softer voice said,
"What have I told you about Smoking Wisp Tree in the morning?" "No, he's bloody real. Come look," he said. "Oi, Exiluk, tell her you're real and come and take a seat by the fire."
"I assure you, I am real," Exiluk said to the wooden door in the round building. "I am a Ceridin." The wife giant poked her head out of the door and said,
"Bloody hell, you weren't joking? Good morning, mister. Let's get you some food."
She went back inside and closed the door behind her. The structures seemed to be made of a flexible lattice, furs, and a sturdy canvas outer. Tall orange flames of various hues wrapped around thick, chunky firewood. Big black stones surrounded the fire. The warmth was almost harsh, yet it was most welcome. The muscular giant gave Exiluk a wooden cup the size of a jug. Exiluk dived in, gulping the water down. It was cold and crisp, so refreshing. He ran some through his hands and his face and beard, and it made him feel less salty and clogged.
"There's plenty of water. Help yourself," the giant said.
The wife giant came out of her home with a pot the size of a cauldron and placed it above the fire.
"Her stews are the best in the village," her husband said.
"That's really sweet," she said, with affection in her eyes.
"It's the only reason I put up with her,"
he said, and he and his friend laughed while she playfully hit them both and took a seat by the fire.
"Tell us a story then, Exiluk," the muscular giant said. "Us giants love a good story."
"What kind of story?" Exiluk said.
"How did you get here? You said you travelled the world. Tell us about that, or tell us something amazing you've heard. I dunno. We love a good story."
"Okay, let me think," Exiluk said. The stew began to bubble, and the scents of meat and vegetables overwhelmed his hunger.
"What about the others?" the wife giant said. "They'll want to hear a story too. We should get everyone around the fire for this." "You're right, especially the kids. What a lovely experience to hear a story from a goat man," her husband said. "Oi!" He raised his voice. "Everyone, come around our fire. We've got a visitor here to tell us a story." Giants emerged from their homes, chattering, staring in wonder at Exiluk as they gathered around the fire. Exiluk sensed a sliver of disappointment deep inside of him. These giants were simple and kind, and there were no palaces or treasures to be seen.